Behind the glittering facade of Hollywood's golden age, some of the most beloved stars harbored secrets that would horrify their adoring fans. The same people who brought joy to millions through song, laughter, and performance often inflicted unimaginable pain on those closest to them, their own children. Wire hangers became weapons. Christmas carols masked cruelty. Comedy hid coldness. These weren't just strict parents or products of their time. These were stars whose ambition, perfectionism, and need for control turned their homes into battlefields. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on 10 of Hollywood's most troubled parent-child relationships. Some of these stories you may have heard whispers about. Others have been carefully guarded for decades. But all of them reveal a painful truth. Fame and fortune don't guarantee love, and sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. Joan Crawford.
Why did you tell her I got expelled?
Because you did get expelled!
That is a lie.
In the 1940s and 50s, Joan Crawford represented Hollywood perfection. Every hair in place, every outfit immaculate, every public appearance a masterclass in star power. She'd clawed her way up from poverty to become one of MGM's biggest names, and she was determined that nothing and no one would threaten what she'd built. But inside her pristine Beverly Hills mansion, her adopted daughter Christina lived in fear. Crawford's obsession with order and control turned everyday life into a nightmare. Clothes had to hang perfectly, floors had to shine. One misplaced item could trigger an explosion of rage. The wire hanger incident, later immortalized in Christina's memoir in the 1978 film Mommy Dearest, wasn't an isolated event. Christina described years of psychological warfare. Crawford would wake her children in the middle of the night to scrub bathroom tiles with toothbrushes. She'd punish them for imagined infractions, then force them to perform gratitude for the cameras when visitors arrived. She wanted perfection, Christina later wrote, and when she couldn't find it in herself, she demanded it from us. Crawford's friends and colleagues saw glimpses of her temper on set, but few imagined what happened behind closed doors. The actress, who'd fought so hard to escape her own difficult childhood, had become the very thing she feared, a tyrant who confused control with love. When Mommy Dearest was released, Hollywood was shocked. Crawford had died the year before, her reputation still intact. The book pulled back the curtain on decades of abuse disguised as discipline. Some of Crawford's defenders claimed Christina exaggerated for profit, but her brother Christopher confirmed much of the story. The woman America adored for her strength and determination had used that same force to terrorize her children. Bing Crosby's voice defined American comfort. White Christmas became the best-selling single of all time. His warm baritone brought families together during the Depression and World War II. Radio audiences trusted him. Movie audiences loved him. He seemed like the kind of father every child would want. His sons knew differently. Gary Crosby, the eldest, broke the silence in his 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way. The title was deliberate, a bitter twist on his father's famous song. Gary described a household ruled by rigid discipline and emotional ice. Bing believed in the old-school approach, spare the rod, spoil the child. But his version went further than most parents of his era. He was a tyrant, Gary wrote. The belt came out frequently. So did fists. Bing demanded perfect behavior, perfect grades, perfect manners. Showing emotion was weakness. Crying was forbidden. The boys learned early to hide their feelings, to present the same smooth surface their father showed the world. The consequences echoed for decades. Of Bing's 4 sons from his first marriage, 2, Lindsay and Dennis, would later take their own lives. Gary struggled with alcoholism and died at 62. Only Philip survived into old age, and even he admitted their childhood left scars. Bing's second family, born when he was older and perhaps mellower, reported a different experience. But that doesn't erase what his first sons endured. Here was a man whose recordings comforted millions during their darkest hours, yet he couldn't offer that same comfort to his own children. The contrast haunts his legacy. How do you reconcile the gentle crooner with the harsh father? Gary once said he loved his father but couldn't forgive him. That tension, love mixed with pain, defined all the Crosby boys' lives. Ethel Gum. Before Judy Garland became a legend, she was Frances Ethel Gum, a child with an extraordinary voice and a mother who saw opportunity. Ethel Gum was the archetypal stage mother. She'd performed in vaudeville herself, but never achieved real success. When she discovered that little Frances could sing, she found her second chance. By age 2, Frances was already performing. By 5, she was part of the Gum Sisters act, touring theaters across the country. There were no lazy summers, no normal school days, no time to just be a child. Ethel kept Frances working constantly. When the girl was tired, Ethel pushed harder. When she wanted to rest, Ethel reminded her that the family needed the money. The message was clear: love came with conditions, and those conditions required performance. Things got worse when MGM signed Frances, now renamed Judy Garland, at age 13. The studio wanted her to stay thin and energetic despite brutal shooting schedules, so they gave her amphetamines to keep her alert and barbiturates to help her sleep. Ethel, desperate to protect her daughter's career, allowed it. Some reports suggest she even administered the pills herself. Judy would later describe her teenage years as a blur of pills, performances, and pressure. She never developed normal sleep patterns. She never learned how to regulate her own energy. The studio and her mother had turned her into a machine that ran on chemicals and fear. "My mother only loved me when I was working," Judy said years later. It's one of the most heartbreaking confessions in Hollywood history. Ethel died in 1953, before seeing the full scope of damage she'd helped cause. Judy would spend the rest of her life battling addiction, struggling through failed marriages, and chasing the approval she never received as a child. The pills that kept her working as a teenager eventually killed her at 47. The tragedy isn't just that Ethel pushed Judy too hard. It's that she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, securing her daughter's future. She confused success with love, and by the time anyone realized the difference, it was too late. Marvin Gaye Sr. Some stories of Hollywood cruelty involve neglect or emotional distance. Marvin Gaye's story ends in violence that shocked the world. Marvin Gaye Sr. was a Pentecostal minister in Washington, D.C., though the family would later move to Detroit and then Los Angeles. He preached about God's love on Sundays, then came home and terrorized his family the rest of the week. He beat his children regularly, mixed scripture with rage, and created an atmosphere of constant fear. Young Marvin, then called Marvin Gaye Jr., bore the worst of it. His father despised him for being sensitive, for loving music, for not being man enough. The beatings were frequent and severe. Marvin grew up terrified of the man who was supposed to protect him. When Marvin found success in music, his father's contempt only grew. He called his son's music sinful. He mocked his fame. Even as Marvin became one of soul music's greatest voices, his father refused to acknowledge his achievements. By 1984, Marvin was struggling. His marriage to Berry Gordy's daughter had collapsed. Drug problems plagued him. He'd moved back into his parents' house in Los Angeles, trying to get clean, but living with his father brought all those childhood terrors rushing back. On April 1, 1984, the day before Marvin's 45th birthday, father and son got into a heated argument. The details remain disputed, but what happened next is tragically clear. Marvin Gaye Sr. retrieved a gun and shot his son twice. Marvin died minutes later. When police arrested him, Marvin Sr. showed no remorse. He was asking for it, he told reporters. At his trial, he claimed self-defense and received a suspended sentence after pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The man who preached about God's love had murdered his own child. The son who'd written What's Going On and Sexual Healing, songs about peace and redemption, died at his father's hands. It's the darkest possible ending to a story of parental abuse, proof that some fathers never learn, never change, and never deserve forgiveness. Joe Jackson. Joe Jackson didn't kill his children, but according to them, he killed something inside them: their childhood, their sense of safety, their ability to trust love. In the small house in Gary, Indiana, Joe ran his family like a boot camp. He'd failed at his own music career and wasn't about to let that happen to his sons. When he discovered they had talent, he became their manager, their drill sergeant, their warden. The boys rehearsed for hours every day after school. Missed notes brought beatings. Wrong steps brought insults. Joe stood over them with his belt, ready to strike at any mistake. The message was clear: perfection or punishment, success or suffering. Michael Jackson later described how his father would sit in a chair with a belt in his hand while they rehearsed. If you messed up, Michael said, you got hit. Sometimes Joe would stand outside their bedroom window at night, wearing a mask, to test whether they'd stay alert. The boys lived in constant fear. Joe's defenders point to the results. The Jackson 5 became superstars. Michael became the king of pop. Their success was undeniable. But so was the cost. Michael spent his adult life trying to reclaim the childhood Joe had stolen. He built Neverland Ranch as a fantasy escape. He surrounded himself with children, trying to give them what he'd missed. He spoke often about forgiving his father, but could never quite manage it. The fear stayed with him, shaping everything from his music to his relationships. Janet, Jermaine, Tito, all the Jackson children carry their own versions of those scars. Some reconciled with Joe before his death in 2018. Others kept their distance, but none of them escaped unscathed. Joe Jackson's legacy is complicated. He created legends, but he did it through fear. He built an empire, but the foundation was his children's pain. When reporters asked if he regretted his methods, he'd shrug and say, "It worked, didn't it?" That answer tells you everything you need to know. To Joe, the end justified the means. Success mattered more than love, and discipline without affection is just another word for abuse. Judy Garland. She swore she'd never be like her mother. She knew firsthand what it meant to be pushed too hard, to perform when you're exhausted, to grow up without really growing up. When she had children of her own, Liza, Lorna, and Joey, she promised herself things would be different. But trauma has a way of repeating itself, even in people who desperately want to break the cycle. But she was also drowning in pills, in debt, in the expectations of a public that wanted the girl from The Wizard of Oz to stay forever young and cheerful. The studio system that had broken her as a teenager kept breaking her as an adult. Liza Minnelli, her eldest daughter, adored her mother but also feared her unpredictability. When she was up, it was heaven, Liza once said. When she was down, the whole house went dark. There were days when Judy was warm and silly and magical, teaching her children songs, making them laugh, and there were days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the pills made her incoherent, when her mood swings terrified everyone around her. The children learned to read their mother's moods the way meteorologists read storm patterns. They became experts at managing her emotions, at trying to keep her stable. That's too much responsibility for any child. Lorna and Joey, Judy's younger children from her third marriage, experienced similar instability. Judy's career was in decline by the 1960s. Money was tight. She'd been fired from films for unreliability. Her addiction had progressed to the point where functioning was increasingly difficult. The tragedy of Judy Garland as a mother is that she wasn't cruel by choice. She didn't want to hurt her children. She simply couldn't escape the damage done to her own childhood. The pills her mother and MGM had given her at 13 created an addiction that ruled her entire adult life. She passed on the pain not through intention but through inability to heal. When Judy died in 1969 at age 47, her children mourned the mother they'd loved and the mother they'd never fully had. Liza would go on to battle her own addiction issues. The cycle continued, softer perhaps, but still present. Sean Connery was 007. Confident, unshakable, the very definition of masculine cool. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. He moved through life with the same assured swagger he brought to Bond, as if nothing could touch him. But his son Jason learned early that the man behind the image was far less warm than his screen persona suggested. Connery grew up in poverty in Edinburgh, Scotland. He worked menial jobs before breaking into acting. When fame came, he protected it fiercely, keeping his private life strictly private. That included emotional distance from his only child. Jason Connery followed his father into acting, but the shadow was long and cold. Sean offered little encouragement or support. When Jason struggled to find roles, his father's advice was harsh. The world doesn't owe you anything. Figure it out yourself. It was the kind of tough love approach that might work for some children but felt like rejection to Jason. "My father taught me strength," Jason said years later, but not warmth. The relationship fractured during Jason's young adult years and took decades to partially mend. Sean mellowed somewhat with age, especially after marrying his second wife Micheline, but the distance between father and son never fully closed. Both men were too proud, too stubborn to say what needed saying. When Sean Connery died in 2020 at age 90, Jason spoke publicly about respecting his father's legacy. But those who know the family understand the complexity behind those words. You can respect someone and still carry wounds from their coldness. Connery's story reminds us that emotional unavailability, while less dramatic than physical abuse, still leaves lasting damage. A child doesn't need a monster for a parent to feel unloved. Sometimes indifference hurts more than anger. Lucille Ball. She made America laugh for decades. I Love Lucy became a cultural phenomenon. She was a pioneer, the first woman to run a major television studio. Everything she touched seemed to turn to comedic gold. But her daughter Lucy Arnaz once said, "My mother was a perfectionist first, a mother second." Growing up, Ball meant living on a set, even at home. Lucy approached motherhood the way she approached her television show. Every scene needed to be perfect, every line delivered correctly, every gesture just right. Mistakes weren't learning opportunities, they were failures. Lucy and her brother Desi Jr. grew up walking on eggshells. Their mother didn't yell or hit, which somehow made it worse. When they disappointed her, and children inevitably disappoint, Lucy would simply withdraw her affection. The warmth would vanish. The smiles would stop, and the kids would be left wondering how to earn their way back into her good graces. Lucy's perfectionism came from her own insecurities. She'd worked brutally hard to build her career, overcoming early failures and Hollywood's dismissal of women over 30. She couldn't afford to let anything slip, including her image as a mother. So she controlled everything she could, and what she couldn't control frustrated her endlessly. The children learned to perform for their mother's approval. Lucy followed her into show business, perhaps hoping that excellence in their shared field would finally win the unconditional love she craved. Desi Jr. struggled more, falling into addiction in his teens, a common response to the pressure of perfection. In later years, Lucy softened somewhat. She remained close to her children, especially Lucy. But the pattern had been set. Love in the Ball household came with conditions, and those conditions were exhausting. It's the quiet kind of cruelty, the kind people don't always recognize as harmful. There were no police reports, no tell-all memoirs, no dramatic revelations. Just children who grew up believing love had to be earned, that being good enough meant being perfect, and that showing vulnerability was dangerous. Charlie Chaplin. His genius is undeniable. He created some of cinema's most enduring images: The Little Tramp, The Tramp's Waddle, silent comedy that still makes people laugh a century later. He belonged to the world, and the world loved him for it. His children, though, have a more complicated view. Chaplin had 11 children from 4 marriages. His perfectionism on set was legendary. He'd shoot scenes dozens of times until every gesture matched his vision. That same relentless standard applied at home. He controlled what his children read, how they spoke, who they saw. Dinner conversation felt like an audition. Silence was often safer than speaking. Charles Chaplin Jr., one of his sons from his second marriage, described life in their mansion as living with a distant monarch rather than a father. Chaplin could discuss art, politics, and philosophy for hours, but he rarely asked his children about their feelings or dreams. He expected them to quietly absorb his brilliance and be grateful for the privilege. Some of Chaplin's children from later marriages remember him more fondly. Geraldine Chaplin became an actress and speaks warmly of her father's wit and creativity. But even she acknowledges his need for control and admiration. He was the sun, and everyone else orbited around him. The tragedy is familiar by now. A brilliant artist who gave everything to his work and had little left for his family. Chaplin's films celebrate the underdog, the outsider, the vulnerable child. Yet he couldn't extend that same empathy to his own children. One of his sons said in an interview, "He belonged to the world, not to us." It's perhaps the saddest epitaph for a father, to be loved by millions and unreachable to the few who needed him most. We like to believe things have changed, that Hollywood learned its lessons, that modern parents, armed with therapy and awareness, would never repeat the mistakes of Crawford, Crosby, or the Jacksons. But scroll through Instagram or turn on reality television, and you'll see familiar patterns. Family vloggers posting every moment of their children's lives for profit. Toddlers who can't consent becoming content creators before they can read. Parents manufacturing drama for views, turning tantrums and tears into monetizable moments. Reality TV dynasties where children grow up in front of cameras, their worst moments preserved forever online. The Kardashians built an empire on family exposure. Dance moms turned children's competitions into traumatic television. Family YouTube channels have been exposed for exploiting and abusing children behind the scenes. The stage has simply moved from Hollywood studios to smartphones, but the same hunger for fame still devours what matters most: a child's privacy, their innocence, their right to a childhood that isn't performed. There are laws protecting child actors now, regulations about work hours and education and finances, but those protections don't extend to social media. Parents can post their children constantly, monetize their image, and face no legal consequences. The kids have no say in the matter. We've also seen another troubling pattern emerge: the children of famous parents becoming famous themselves, not always by choice. Some handle it well, others crumble under the pressure of living up to a legacy they never asked for. The tools have changed, but human nature hasn't. The desire for attention, the belief that success justifies sacrifice, the willingness to use children as stepping stones, it's all still there, just wearing different clothes. So here's the question I'll leave you with. As we celebrate these legendary careers, do we have a responsibility to remember the children who suffered for them? Can we appreciate the art while acknowledging the pain behind it? If these stories resonated with you, or if they reminded you that fame doesn't equal happiness, consider subscribing. There are more untold stories from Hollywood's past, and some of them might surprise you even more than what you heard tonight. The rhinestones have faded, but the scars remain.